play on the on the recording. Um, and I will just go ahead and turn it over to Kara. I ask that you all stay muted. I'll be monitoring the chat for questions, and then I'll be moderating a Q&A at the end of Kara's presentation. I know that we're going to focus heavy on the Q&A today, so I hope y'all brought your questions. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Molly. I am so grateful to you and Riska for giving us the opportunity. And I agree, heavy on the questions and conversation is the goal for today, because we've had a couple of other webinars. Information about Restored generally has been out there. So I just want to touch on it at like a high level, highlight some of the changes that went into effect in the last week. Just briefly mention 2 other grant programs we have out there, and then really get to questions sort of as quickly as we can. So again, my name is Kara Kunst, Policy Advisor with Commerce, and let's get started here. We do at the top of our PowerPoints this week have a quick PSA that I hope Molly doesn't mind my including. We are emphasizing the governor's push to re-emphasize the importance of mask wearing anytime we're out or socializing, remote work when possible, and the temporary closure of break rooms that she has discussed. We're asked to highlight this because we think it's really important to keep sharing out the message. And if you have questions or guidance for your workplaces, please visit reopeningri.com. So we've had Restore Rhode Island grant program open since the beginning of August. We're really pleased with the amount that we've been able to get out there to businesses. We have 1,500 applicants that have received over $12 million, 17% of which are minority owned. But we, recognize that businesses and nonprofit needs are significant. So we've both expanded the program and we've doubled the size of grants available to applicants. So what we have done is grants are ranging from from $3,000 up to $30,000 now. If you've already applied, there's a streamlined adjustment process. If you have not yet applied, you'll go in and be able to apply for up to $30,000, which is determined by a series of eligibility requirements, including the number of employees you have. We have expanded eligibility to more organizations, including licensed childcare and nonprofits in the 501c3 and C6 space. Healthcare providers and true academic institutions, think like colleges and universities and private schools, are still ineligible, but if teaching is a component of your program, please don't read that non-academic component and think that you're ineligible. And then we also have a streamlined application. From the beginning of the program to now, we have significantly reduced the documentation requirements. And the adjustment process, again, is done by email, hopefully in a very easy fashion for those that have already received grants. So let's hit on the nonprofits and childcare. I'll mention childcare just briefly first, because I don't think this is my target audience for that. But if you're a licensed childcare provider and you did not receive the LISC DHS funds earlier in the summer, we've expanded this program to you. Now on nonprofits, again, non-academic and non-healthcare related, and what we mean are like true academic institutions and healthcare providers are still ineligible for this particular program, but other 501c3 and 501c6 entities may now apply. This includes faith-based entities, although we can only fund your non-sectarian activities, and the funds can't be used for lobbying or advocacy activities. If you did already receive a grant when the grant amounts were lower than what they currently are, or you weren't able to take advantage of some of the other program changes that we've made, there are now Excel downloads, and we will have a web form calculator up on our website soon so that you can email and request up to a doubling of your grant award. What we'll have you do is fill out a form with all of your eligible expenses. You send that over to us, and we try to get those processed as quick as we can. It'll be up to a 30-day timeline, but we're aiming to do much faster than that. I also want to highlight for the nonprofits that we may have in attendance today, we have another grant program available for you. This is with the Rhode Island Foundation. It's a $2.5 billion pot of money to award $15,000 to $75,000 grants to nonprofits. And unlike Restore, which will pay for your fixed business expenses like your rent and your utilities, the Rhode Island Foundation program is geared towards new or expanded programs or services or direct assistance that you may be doing in direct response to COVID-19. There is a deadline on that of the end of this month. There is not a deadline for Restore, but please note there is a deadline for this grant, and we do anticipate this program being a bit more competitive. So with Restore Rhode Island, the most important thing to do is visit our website, www.commerceri.com. And I just want to highlight there is a slew of tools and resources, including a frequently asked questions document, which is a living document. So when we get questions that we think are relevant to more than just the applicant that's asking them, we do update the information and resources that we have online regularly. So there is a link to the actual grant application, there's that FAQ, and then there's also a full list of partners that we have. So if you have, if you would like to have assistance on this program, I believe we have RISCA listed on there. We have chambers of commerce, we have community groups. If you are in need of Spanish or other language assistance, we have specific partners that can help you navigate the grant process. I also want to just mention briefly the Business Adaptation Grant. If you are a business, sole proprietor, or nonprofit who is adapting your programs and services to meet new audience demands in the face of COVID, we would highly encourage you to also check out on our website the Business Adaptation Grant. The application process is actually beginning today. We just had the website go up today, so please disregard the part where it says tomorrow. And like the Rhode Island Foundation Grant, I do just want to note that this has a November 9th deadline. So if it looks like you may be eligible for all three programs, I do just want to note the Business Adaptation and the Rhode Island Foundation have deadlines. Restore Rhode Island does not. I already mentioned there are many ways to get help. We will have office hours available next week, likely 3 or 4 days. I'll make sure to share those with Molly. So if you, after this, have more questions, get started, want more assistance, we set up these office hours for small groups and one-on-ones to answer specific application questions. So with that, I hope I didn't speak so quickly it came across as too much, and I would love, Molly, if there are some questions that we could start answering.
I'm going to unmute myself. Okay, so first I'm going to ask some eligibility questions. Are individuals, sole proprietors, businesses, nonprofits ineligible because they've received other CARES Act money?
No, and so again, I know childcare is not my necessarily target audience here, but I just want to note childcare is the only program where if you received other funds, specifically through that LISC DHS program, that you're not eligible for our other programs. Otherwise, if you are a business, a nonprofit, or a sole proprietor, you are eligible to apply for any and all of our programs. The caveat is that all of the funds need to go to different purposes. So if you had a PPP or an EIDL loan, you are welcome to also apply for Restore, but your expenses need to be expenses that weren't paid for through those loans. If you also want to apply for the Rhode Island Foundation and the Business Adaptation Grant, again, you are welcome to. It just has to be for different purposes.
What if folks got a CARES Act grant through RISCA from the NEA that's just general operating support? Does that impact anything?
Again, I just need to make sure you have separate expenses that these grant funds would go to pay for.
Okay. What about, oh, this is a good question that I'm getting a lot that I prepared you for. The drop in revenue for nonprofits, is that both contributed and earned revenue, or is it just earned revenue?
It is all of your revenue. We would like to see a full revenue picture when you're calculating that 30% loss that we use to demonstrate your eligibility.
And how can nonprofits demonstrate that 30% loss? Can it be an average of the 2019 audit monthlies versus 2020 monthly actuals? How does that 30% loss work exactly?
So we want to see a month-to-month comparison. So we ask that you select a month between March and July of 2020 and compare it to either the same month in 2019 or January or February of 2020. So we just need to see a month-to-month snapshot, which I know is more challenging. I know that there are accrual accounting issues, that there are campaigns that you may have run but now are not running, and all those sorts of questions. But we're asking that you take the fullest revenue picture you can, your earned and contributed income, and do a month over month.
Can the 30% include loss of annual grant money?
Yes. So if you had grant revenue that came in your comparison month last year and you don't have that this year, then yes, that would show as money you had last year that you don't have this year. Yeah.
So I'm just going to underscore that it's actuals, right? So it's not versus what you budgeted this year versus what is actually happening. It's actuals of last year versus actuals of this year.
Yes.
Do expenses covered by Restore RI include payroll?
So no, so payroll is not an eligible expense for the Restore Rhode Island grant program. We're trying to target other fixed business expenses like your rent or your utilities if you have business insurance, as well as any COVID costs that you may have incurred. So if you bought extra cleaning supplies or cleaning services, if you redid your websites, if you had to buy plexiglass shields or equipment to take your activities outside as opposed to having them inside, you want all of those kinds of costs. Unfortunately, payroll, so wages and compensation and like your group health insurance, those are not eligible Restore costs.
And can folks apply for funding and include expenses they haven't incurred yet but will by the end of the year?
Yes. And if you don't mind, I'd like to zoom out and actually both answer that question but touch on one of the most frequently asked questions that is likely to come up. So we've tried to build in a lot of flexibility. So the month that you choose to demonstrate your revenue loss does not have to be the same month that you use for your employee count. And your expenses can be any expenses incurred between March 1st and December 1st. Your expenses also do not have to be tied to the month that you use to demonstrate your revenue. So with your expenses, again, March 1st through December 1st, and we can't prepay things that you might incur next year. So they really, like your December rent, yes, that could potentially count. You'll have incurred it before December 1st, but we can't pay like your first quarter of 2021. I see a lot of questions popping up in the chat too, Molly.
I'm asking these mostly.
Oh, good. Okay. I was going to say they're going too fast for me to see.
Yeah, you don't need to worry. I'll ask you. So is mortgage interest count as a fixed expense?
Yes. So while unfortunately the CARES Act prohibits us from paying or reimbursing your like mortgage, your base payment, we can cover your mortgage interest payments.
What about for a lot of artists and sole proprietors and small artist businesses, they have a studio or home office and everything's located at home. Though folks separate those on their tax returns for the home office deductions, can those same proportions be applied to a Restore RI grant?
Yes. So if you are deducting a portion of your home rent or mortgage, and again, interest, not your base payment, as a business expense, you can also have Restore Rhode Island pay for that expense. We do ask that, of course, you be reasonable and in line with what you are already claiming on your taxes.
Can you talk a little bit more about what COVID adaptations might be specific to arts and culture sector, things that folks might not be thinking about that might not have come up yet, or things that y'all have wanted to do but haven't been able to afford and can maybe get funding for that can be spun as COVID adaptation expenses?
Exactly. And I think when we think about the COVID adaptation expenses, a lot of us, I mean, look, we're doing this Zoom online. Like, wouldn't it be great if we were together in a room and we could actually interact? But everybody's doing things online and on Zoom. So if you've done things like purchased a computer, purchased a professional Zoom subscription, if you've moved perhaps in-person sales of your work to online, developed a website, perhaps paid for a web designer, purchased an e-commerce like a Square or other point of sale system, all of those we can count as variable costs that you've incurred as a response to COVID. Also, you know, the fixed costs, we talk a lot about rent, and I know there's a lot of work from home rent, but I do want to note, if you have a studio space that you rent, if you have equipment or space that you rent outside of your home, and these are your fixed business costs, those are absolutely eligible as well. Just because you may not rent a full office for yourself doesn't mean that your other fixed business costs, like renting space in a studio, don't count.
So I'm going to tag just the Steel Yard here really quickly because I know y'all are virtually here. One thing that we talked about being a potential fixed cost is if somebody books time in your kiln regularly, that could be a fixed cost as long as it's sort of a regular booking. So things like that. If y'all are using studio space, equipment space, if you have a membership, I see Shari here, if you have a membership to a co-working space, those would all be fixed costs, yes?
Correct, yep.
Amazing.
So all of those things that you regularly pay, we would include those in your business fixed cost category.
What about, so the amazing New Urban Arts has been sending art kits home to their students. Do those costs to send both, like what of that would count as Restore RI expenses because it is a COVID adaptation?
So that one is a little bit challenging because I may want to, that's one of the ones where we may want to have a one-on-one conversation, only because if it's the same materials and supplies that you would have anyway, we don't cover continuing inventory costs. But if you're switching to like a subscription service, I would probably want to get into those costs a little bit more and see what we could have qualify as eligible.
But so I'm just thinking about that, like if it's equipment, if it's supplies they wouldn't normally be buying because they would provide them if the kids were physically in the space and now they're buying them to send home. Do you think, and I can also set you up with Dan, but do you think those supplies would count, or would it just be the expenses incurred in the home delivery as opposed to in-person delivery?
So I'm thinking that we would limit it to the home delivery. This is a tricky, I didn't anticipate, Molly. So I always hate when I have to say we may need to do a follow-up on that one specifically, because it does sound like you're doing the kinds of things we want to fund, like you're adapting to COVID and modifying your services. But we are limited on, like we can replace inventory lost if you had to, like perishable inventory lost if you had to close, but we can't cover regular replacement inventory. So we've got like a really fine line with this example that I may need to talk to my group about, only because I do think the delivery costs, but I don't know about the stuff that is getting delivered.
Okay. And delivery costs couldn't just include staff time. It would only be the like shipping or boxing or that sort of thing.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm seeing that we have a couple of other organizations that are doing similar things, including Manton Avenue Project, just to make sure that they can send supplies home for their students.
Yeah, and so the Restore program is great, especially if you have some fixed costs that because of your lost revenue, we can be really helpful with. If you're adapting and offering new programs, the Business Adaptation Grant Program may be a good one to take a look at. And I'll try to pop a link into the chat at some point during this because the information just went up today. But the Business Adaptation Grant has a little bit of a broader expense definition for costs related to changes to your programming than our Restore program does.
I'm getting a couple, y'all's questions are coming in fast and furious, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay, so I'm gonna pivot from that one to just run through these questions that I've gotten since then. What period can folks claim fixed costs like rent, etc., these subscriptions, that sort of thing?
So they have to be incurred between March 1st and December 1st.
Okay.
And we do need you to spend the money by December 30th.
What about insurance costs? Do those count as fixed costs?
It depends on what the insurance is. If it's your group health plan, that's a no, because it's a personnel compensation cost. But if you have like a type of business insurance on an office or studio space, if you operate out of some kind of truck or cart and you have vehicle insurance or similar insurance on that, business insurances, vehicle insurance, those things count. Personnel related insurances do not count.
What about if folks want to take classes on like marketing or e-commerce or that sort of thing, some training for business owners on things that allow them to adapt, does that count as a COVID adaptation cost?
That one I may have to write down. The more common one is a consulting service. So when somebody hires a graphic designer or a web designer to set up their new website, that one is an affirmative yes. But if you are doing it yourself and taking on the cost of a training, I will need to double check, and I'll send later today, Molly, like a list of some of these answers to you.
Wonderful. So y'all, I'll be posting sometime later today, both this video and some additional arts focused information about both Restore RI and business adaptation that'll include these answers. And also I just want to point out to y'all something really important Kara just said, which is if you're paying a website designer because you need a better and more robust website to adapt to COVID, that counts as an expense. Y'all, get your websites updated.
So I've seen two questions about independent contractors. Could
yes.
we hit on the way there? So there are two ways that independent contractors can be incorporated into your Restore Rhode Island grant application. The first is that if you have independent contractors that work for you, perhaps are the teachers of your programming, and they are in your space at least, or work directly for you, at least 15 hours per week, they can be counted as a half-time employee to your employment count. And then if they work over 35 hours a week directly for you, they can count as a full-time employee for you. And there's also no limit on that. And I apologize for the barking dog. And then the second part is if you have somebody you've effectively hired as an independent contractor, but they're not, working for you week to week, they're just doing graphic design or web design, those are eligible expenses. So if you have folks that are like working directly for you, they can count to your FTE count. Or if you have somebody you're hiring to do a specific service for you, that can also be an eligible expense.
So hiring actors for a theater company, even if it's to adapt to new guidelines, probably would not count as an eligible expense?
So probably not as an eligible expense. If there's somebody or a few people that you've had working for you and they meet that 15-hour threshold, they could you could count them as employees though.
Okay. Ricardo, does that make sense? So if they're with you regularly week to week, 15 hours a week, they count for your FTEs to bump up your grant amount, but they wouldn't count as an eligible expense. But if they're less than 15 hours a week, and they're for one specific task that's about adapting your business, the theater, to COVID, they would count. Which And like, I think probably, Kara, you're probably going to get some really specific questions in follow-up about that sort of thing.
And that's okay. And I will fully acknowledge we did an expansion on September 22nd to include sole proprietors, and then the expansion this week to include nonprofits. So I will fully acknowledge that our existing, expense examples do not cover every possible scenario. So if you do have something that is case specific, do feel free to reach out to either me or via email to info@commerceri.com, because we can help you sort through, and we may need additional information to figure out if your expenses are eligible.
As far as expenses, this is about the business adaptation program, but I think it also applies to Restore RI equally. Does the business adaptation program include modifications to the facility in addition to just expanded programming?
Yes, it does. Sorry, I was having a little trouble toggling my mute button there. And restaurants are such an easy example that I'm going to use them. But an example is a restaurant that set up an outdoor dining area. So all of those physical changes that were made, the purchase of tables that are appropriate for outdoors, planters and landscaping to like demarcate the area, signage, etc. Those kinds of physical adaptation costs that a business or a nonprofit makes to continue to operate under our COVID-19 restrictions are all eligible.
Okay, I'm gonna weed through my questions again. So this is a question that's been touched on a little bit already, but I've gotten multiple questions in the chat about this in the last like 3 minutes. What about a rental income reduction? For example, a lot of folks here have venues where they were doing rentals. Would a loss in non-recurring rentals qualify?
So when you're calculating your revenue and you've lost that rental income, then yes, you would want to include that in the reduction of the money that you have coming in. And that would absolutely go to demonstrating your eligibility for this program.
Okay. I'm just going to read this one word for word. AIC, which is Arts in Common, which is an arts organization in Bristol, is a non-bricks and mortar arts nonprofit. So they don't have, you don't have any losses recorded. They only raise money per project for things like Porch Fest, Book Fest, lecture series. Because of COVID, artists are being pushed out of decommissioned schools and losing their studios in Bristol. And Arts in Common is interested in creating and managing studio spaces for artists in the new Unity Park in the Wood Street Industrial Complex. Would this qualify?
So I really want to encourage them to look at the business adaptation grant, mostly because one of the early things you said, it sounds like the revenue loss calculation may be challenging to demonstrate, and you don't have to do the same revenue loss calculation you do for Restore for business adaptation. Because if you're looking at renting a new space so that you can offer replacement programming for all the disruption that's occurred with your existing, that's really what we want to fund and are excited about funding with business adaptation. I do have a couple of examples where somebody was move, and so the rent is on 2 different spaces, and that has been okay and approved through Restore. But for that specific example, I kind of feel the need to encourage them to look closely at the business adaptation grant, which I'll also note is higher. So the cap on Restore is $30,000. But for a sole proprietor, it's either going to be $3,000 or $5,000. The business adaptation grant is not calculated in the same way using your employee count to determine your maximum award. So the business adaptation grant is also going to be more sized to the costs you have of adapting your programming. So I do want to really encourage anybody in the art space and the nonprofit space who is figuring out how to do your programming differently to really look at that other program too.
Okay, here's an FTE question about Restore RI that's specific to nonprofits. RISCA serves a bunch of nonprofits that are either all volunteer run or have less than one FTE. Either a part-time independent contractor who's running it, or a 10 to 15 hour a week person that's just doing communications. How does that translate for Restore RI?
So let me go ahead and flash briefly the chart on our website. So if you are
it came and then it went.
Wait, what was that?
I'm seeing, oh no, never mind. I just had my studio view. Okay, go for it. Sorry.
So if you are a organization, any kind of organization, sole proprietor, incorporated business, non-for-profit, and you do not have any W-2 employees or those qualifying independent contractors I mentioned that work 15 or 35 hours directly for you, you're eligible for $3,000 or $5,000. If you even have a part-timer who is a W-2 employee for you, you do qualify for that next tier, the $5,000 or $9,000 tier. So you will be eligible. You're just eligible for a smaller grant amount than a larger organization would be.
So if you have any person on W-2 as an employee, regardless if they're 5-10 hours a week, that bumps you up to having one staff member.
Correct.
And if you have somebody who's on 1099 or is an independent contractor that works 15 or more hours a week every week for you, that would bump you up to the one. But if you have an independent contractor that's 15 or less a week, you would be in the owner only.
Correct. So say you are a small nonprofit and you have an executive director on a contract that you pay through a 1099. If they work for you more than 15 hours, yep, you get that bump up. Otherwise, you're at the owner only, no employee line.
If folks have hired independent contractors specifically to help pivot, even if they're working for the organization, the nonprofit, the business, every week from now on out, but they're independent contractors and it's specific to a COVID pivot, would that be an eligible expense, or would it just count to FTE in the time frame, which we'll go back to the FTE time frame in a second?
Yeah, so if you've hired independent contractors, it would go to your FTE count. You can't include the payment for them because that would be a personnel cost as an eligible expense.
Okay. And can you remind us when that FTE count is? Like what month, what time frame that FTE count is?
So we would like you to please use your employment counts from one of the months between January and June of 2020. And so we've tried to build in some flexibility here. We know that there are businesses, and I do pick on restaurants a lot, but restaurants in particular that laid folks off in March. So it's most advantageous for them to use January or February. We also know we have seasonal businesses that didn't begin to hire up until May or June. So it is a single month between January and June. And again, it does not have to be the same month you use for your revenue loss. And it is not tied to the months that you have expenses for. It's just one of those first 6 months of the year.
Okay. If you're, that's a really good question, Ricardo. I'm just going to ask that one. If you're hiring someone to help you navigate this process, so I'm going to also just expand that to if you're hiring an independent contractor to help you with COVID-related grant writing, would that be an eligible cost?
So if you hire somebody on as staff, that's not because personnel. If you're hiring somebody who is consulting for you, consultants are an eligible cost for this program.
Okay. even if it's just like literally a grant writer to write COVID specific grants, that would be an eligible cost? If it's an independent contractor consultant?
So the way we have framed it is consulting services to pivot or adapt to COVID-19. So if you are one of the entities that needs to do the grant calculator and you have to list out all of your costs, if you have hired somebody to help you pivot or adapt to COVID-19, I would just make sure to list it that way, because that is how it would be eligible.
Great. What about entities that have independent contractors that are stipended and it's not about hours, it's just a sort of low, very small stipend amount that sort of makes them staff but isn't connected to an hourly wage or number of hours?
So for anybody who's including independent contractors, we only ask for additional documentation from 5% of our applicants. So to zoom out, if you are including employees, if you're not filing as just a 0 employee business or a sole proprietor, you're asked to do a grant calculator. In the grant calculator, you tell us like what months you're using and then the number of employees in each category, part-time, full-time, W-2, and then part-time, full-time contractor. And then if you're one of the 5% we ask for additional documentation for, we just ask you to show us 1099s. We don't ask to see any contracts or other documents with those contractors. So quite frankly, we don't know how many hours they work for you, but you know how many hours of work they're doing. So you are attesting to the truthfulness and honesty of your application. So regardless of what you pay them, if they're working for you 15 hours or more, you can include them on the grant calculator. And frankly, the same thing's true for the W-2 employees. We ask for, if you're one of the entities, we ask for additional documentation, either your Rhode Island tax form TX-17 or your IRS form 941. And those just have the whole number of employees on them. We can't see who is full-time and part-time, but again, you're attesting to the truthfulness of your application. So if you have qualifying independent contractors who are stipended or however they're paid, if they work for you 15 hours or more, you can include them.
Okay. I'm going to go back to COVID adaptation expenses a little bit. If folks have purchased or upgraded air circulation, air purification systems since the beginning of this, does that count as a COVID adaptation?
So
expense?
I am actually working today. This actually came up on the 9 o'clock webinar I was doing with Newport, clarifying what we will permit for HVAC related costs, because we were permitting like filters as an example, but we also had a request come in for repairs to an HVAC system and a more efficient HVAC system. So I am getting additional clarity on whether or not we count those as physical adaptation changes. So I will add that to your list too, Molly, because I'm going to send that out to the good folks in Newport as well when I get that answer.
Yeah, I know that's really relevant to theaters, but also to folks like studio artists who are teaching private lessons who have upgraded their air filtration purification so they could have private students back in a space in a more safe way. So,
yeah, everybody's responding. And there's so many folks that are attempting to accommodate all of our new guidelines as efficiently and effectively as possible. So like, we know we've asked for windows to be open, and even as the weather is getting colder, folks are doing that, taking it outside, and folks are doing that. So I do want to note that there is such a high level of appreciation from my side on the commerce and the government side for everything that folks are willing to do.
Okay. One question, so this is an organization that functions as an independent 501c3 under another 501c3. Would it make sense to apply as the smaller of the two or the parent organization, or can they apply as two separate entities?
If they're two distinct entities, perhaps at separate addresses or with separate incorporation statuses, you can apply, sorry, and I'm trying to think of the right framing and phrasing for nonprofits. For businesses, we tell you can just apply for up to 3 locations with the same ownership. And I was trying to avoid saying ownership for nonprofits, but you can apply for up to 3 entities with sort of under a shared umbrella is I think the way I'd phrase it then. Okay. And I apologize for not being precise.
This is one of the reasons we're having this, right, is because this is such a broad grant program that's serving so many different industries, and everybody's industry has slightly different needs and expenses. So one question is if if entities have hired fabricators who are independent contractors working less than 15 hours a week to specifically create equipment to expand outdoor access for business and arts, would that be an eligible expense?
So it sounds like you're not hiring them to like run a program for you as staff, but you're hiring them to outfit your space to accommodate the continuation of your programming. So to me, yes, that sounds exactly like what we mean when we talk about physical adaptation.
Great. And this is another translating this to nonprofit, and I asked the same question about the business adaptation grants. All of the application talks about the owner's tax return. For a nonprofit, would that just translate directly to 990? And what level of detail do you need? Would you accept a 990N, for example, if a really small nonprofit is just required by the IRS to submit the postcard?
So this is the second time I've gotten this question today. So I do want to make sure, and I want to revisit our checklist, which I do highly, highly encourage folks to use as they get ready to apply. And our checklist, we need to make sure that we're very clear that there isn't an owner for a nonprofit, that we are running the same kind of checks that we are when we do ownership of a business. So the owner, there's not an owner's tax return equivalent for a nonprofit. There is a business tax return equivalent for a nonprofit, which is the 990, and we will take whichever form it is you're doing, the N, the easy, the postcard, whichever one that you have.
Okay, and then I'll follow that up with, for the business adaptation grant, one of the requirements is that you submit government issued identification for the owner of the business. How does that translate for a nonprofit? Would it be the main point of contact?
So whoever is filling out the application, if it's the executive director or the grant writer, whoever, they're the ones whose contact information in the front of the ID is what we ask for.
Okay, I'm gonna switch back to talking about the different locations and applying for up to 3 locations under one entity umbrella. This is a question about how you demonstrate the 30% loss in income. Do you need to break down the income for each location as opposed to the overall organization?
Yes, so if you're applying for 3 separate locations, we want to see the revenue loss for each of those locations, and they're each going to be a separate application that you put in.
So this is another fresh air, construction costs to redesign a space to allow more fresh air in the room. So I would imagine this would be things like if there were windows that didn't previously open and they needed new windows, so they opened, or other just wall and movement of air questions.
Yeah, so we would include furniture and fixture modifications, your contractor costs for installation or movement of things, the setting up of your space to accommodate the COVID guidelines. All of that would fall under our physical adaptation changes, yes.
Great.
And the reason I say it that way is if you haven't gotten a chance to look at the grant calculator yet, physical adaptation changes is one of the drop downs you can select when entering your expenses.
And then one person just wants to clarify eligibility. The detailed eligibility list includes other criteria for adversely economically injured beyond the 30% revenue reduction. And this person just wants to make sure that the 30% revenue reduction is a firm requirement for the Restore RI grant.
Correct, it is. We do ask that additional question about other impacts to your organization, but the 30% does have to be met to be eligible for Restore.
However, is there a revenue reduction requirement for the business adaptation grant?
No, so the business adaptation grant is going to be awarded based on the adaptation idea or the process changes that you are looking to implement. And it does also go back. I do want to note, if you started doing something to enable fall programming in August, you can apply for that.
How far back does the business adaptation grant go? I know I'm starting to ask you questions outside of your area of the circus over there.
That is completely okay. I like to think I have a toe in all of the rings of our circus. It's fun that way. It does go back to March 1st. We think that stuff over the summer is more likely to be where applications come in, but it does have the same date range as the Restore Rhode Island program.
Okay, so it's possible that for New Urban Arts and Mountain Avenue Project, who did sort of robust send home art boxes for their students, and a lot of them included also basic needs like food and gift cards, that might be something that the business adaptation grant could cover going back and going forward.
It could. I would also remind that for stuff like that, you will be eligible to apply for both the Rhode Island Foundation grant and the business adaptation grant. And I mostly say that because we want to both get the money out the door and also help the organizations doing great work as much as possible.
Yep. And y'all, I will include a link to the Rhode Island Foundation grant that we're talking about in, I'll post it in the Arts Administrators of Rhode Island Facebook group, but I'll also put it in wherever I end up putting the notes from this meeting. Okay, one more question. Oh, yes. Do you need to, okay, two more questions. Has there been clarification on revenues lost from events that were canceled? So can you just remind us how we're measuring this revenue loss?
So the revenue loss is your actual revenues received in an impacted month, which is a month from March through July, compared to either the same month in 2019 or January or February 2020. So if you had events that were canceled, so you just didn't get the revenue, say in May of 2020, then you just wouldn't have that money showing up on your revenue calculations. We have been asked, and I just want to make sure this isn't what the individual applicant may also be wondering about. We have been asked if losses associated with canceled events can be an eligible an eligible expense for this program, and for the most part, no. You can reflect the lack of income on your revenue calculation, but if you had to do something like refund tickets or have cancellations and you were out dollars from that, unfortunately, those are not eligible costs.
Do you need to apply for separate items if you apply for Restore RI and the business adaptation grant? So is there double dipping allowed?
So there's no double dipping allowed, and since these are all running fairly simultaneously, I do encourage you to apply for different things in the hopes that you're able to get some money from each of the programs. One of the ways that might be helpful is if you do have fixed business costs, I would use Restore Rhode Island for those. So if you have rent and utilities, I would focus on those for Restore Rhode Island. And if you have adaptation costs, and you don't need to apply those to Restore Rhode Island to maximize that grant, I would apply to the business adaptation grant with those costs.
And the business adaptation grant, those specific adaptations would include things for like teaching artists, performing arts groups, et cetera, to be able to stream virtual programming, right? So computers, video equipment, video software, lighting.
Yes, so the things that you need to do to be able to run your programming. So if that is a streaming subscription service, if that is equipment, including, yes, cameras and computers, those are the things that business adaptation can help with.
Here's a super important question. Do the services and items under both or either Restore Rhode Island and the business adaptation grants, like starting new services, doing things online, et cetera, need to meet state and federal ADA requirements, like providing captioning or ASL interpretation? So that's a really polite poke at us that we're not meeting those standards either.
So is it a requirement that those accommodations be included? I do not believe so. Would those costs be eligible? Like if you were acquiring professional services or software to do the closed captions for you, I believe that those would be eligible costs. Yeah, I do not believe that we have a requirement that those are incorporated in the grant expenses.
Okay. So some nonprofits have received grants for 2020 in the fiscal year 2019. And they've already been told that they will not receive the major grants that they depend on to operate for 2021. Is there any relief for this yet if the money would come in 2021 or be covering expenses for 2021?
So unfortunately not, and this is the federal restriction on the CARES Act dollars. They have to be expended by December 30th of this year. So we do recognize that there are looming issues heading into 2021 and the next 6 to 12 months regarding lost grants and continued expenses. Unfortunately, the federal government CRF guidelines do not allow us to pay or take into consideration the future COVID-related impacts that our nonprofits are contending with.
Yeah, and we'll see, y'all stay tuned, right? Like all of these programs are based on the CARES Act funding, which is at the federal level, and the CARES Act funding came with this December 31st deadline. So this is this is like where the money comes has this restriction that it has to be expended by December 31st. So we'll see if we get another round of stimulus, if we get other programming that will impact 2021, like we will let y'all know if/when that happens. But right now, all the CARES Act stuff ends December 31st. Terrifyingly, this includes the pandemic unemployment expansion. So all of you on pandemic unemployment assistance, the expansion for independent contractors, gig workers and stuff, that all expires on December 31st. It's scary. Okay.
It is.
But that's all at a federal level.
A couple of folks are asking for the links, and I can help you do a link roundup after this, Molly, and make sure you get at least business adaptation and the Rhode Island Foundation. I'm also noting we have somebody in the chat who mentions they're getting asked for the personal tax return, but they're a nonprofit. So that means something went not quite right with our conversion of the first part of your application. I have included my email address in the name on my screen, but I'm not sure if that's fully visible. So I'm going to put both my email address and I'm going to put our general info@commerceri.com email address in the chat box, because for that one I will need to know like the organization name you've applied under so I can go track down and see why you're getting asked for something that you should not be getting asked for as a nonprofit.
And I'm adding these grant links.
Great.
Can you talk at all about the difference between the Commerce's Business Adaptation Grant and the grant from Rhode Island Foundation specifically for nonprofits that y'all are partnering with?
So at a very high level, they have fairly similar purposes. It's a focus on changing programs and services to continue serving clients in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Key difference, Rhode Island Foundation is only for nonprofits. Business Adaptation is open to the same universe as our Restore Rhode Island grant. So for-profits, solopreneurs, and sole proprietors, as well as nonprofits, are all eligible for the business adaptation.
For business adaptation grants, is there an FTE limit either at the bottom end or the top end?
I do not believe that there is. I believe that with the business adaptation, and I'm double checking and I believe that I'm correct. I believe there's not an employee count for that one, but I'm also going to put that on the list of follow-ups for you, Molly. Well, not literally for you, but for everybody.
Will you maybe look at your chat? I'm going to let you read the answer that I have for that.
That's great. Christine is so quick on the draw. Folks, my colleague, Christine Smith, who is the head of the Business Adaptation Grant, has apparently emailed Molly in rapid time and says that there is no prescriptive list of eligible industries or employee counts stipulated for the Business Adaptation Program.
So unlike the Restore RI, which has the FTE cap of 50, and also you must be in the severely impacted industries as outlined by your NAICS code, none of that is required for the business adaptation grants, right? It's open to any size and any industry.
Correct.
I know we're like 2 minutes over, but I just, Kara and I had a quick conversation yesterday about some NAICS code wonkiness, and I would love you to talk about that. So I'm going to prompt you with this question. If folks have an NAICS code on their tax return, either 990, Schedule C, business tax return, that is not under the severely impacted list that y'all have, but one of those severely impacted NAICS codes more closely represents what y'all are actually doing, is that okay?
So it is okay, and I will note, and perhaps I can even offer a couple of examples, that the NAICS, or it's sometimes listed as a business industry classification, depending upon which tax return you're filing, is not always actually representative of the business that you are running or that you are currently running, because you've perhaps evolved over time. So as an example, I had a swimming pool that had a academic institution code, possibly because they taught swim lessons, but the recreation code was more appropriate. Fairly regularly, personal services like salons and stylists will have the healthcare provider code rather than the personal services code. Also, folks that make things. So I've had iron, it was some form of ironworking, and I had a bakery who both had manufacturing codes, which are 311s, which are eligible, but they're not severely impacted. And I mean, for the bakery, that was very clear cut. They're a retail establishment at the core. And for the iron related one, they were also engaged most heavily in retail at this point, selling their goods. So for all of those, really take a look at the NAICS code list and make sure that you're applying with the one that's most appropriate for your business. And if it is a severely impacted NAICS code, we want you to take advantage of this grant. What will happen though is if you apply with a code that is different than the one on the tax document that you share with us, it'll just get held for a quick secondary review. You may get to talk to me again if I can't just tell from a website or a web presence what it is that the business or nonprofit is doing. But that is eminently solvable and fixable, and we want you to apply with the NAICS code that is most appropriate to the way you're currently operating and helps you maximize this grant.
So I'll call out a arts example that I know has happened. There's one motion picture theaters, which is code 512131. I pulled the email up so I could read it to y'all. That is not in the severely impacted list for commerce. However, since this entity wasn't only a film, which is motion picture theaters with a subcategory film festival exhibitors. Since this organization was not truly a film festival, the person dug a little bit deeper and found another NAICS code that was more specific, which was promoters of performing arts, sports, and similar events without facilities, which does qualify into the severely impacted category, right? So that's a good example of like just looking a little deeper and really thinking about what you're actually doing. And I just want to flag again that if that's different than what's on your tax return, that's okay. It will just cause a second look and maybe a 24-hour delay in your application getting processed.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The most common thing is that the NAICS codes that appear on tax returns are just not quite right for the way the organization is actually functioning. So like if you're a 711, in the example you just used, and you are actively promoting performing arts events, then that's the NAICS code that we would want to award you a grant under, not the motion picture theaters one, because frankly, if you're not actually a movie theater, we want you to use the most appropriate code.
So we're going to end one more question. So you aren't automatically considered as highly impacted just because you're a 501c3. Where do folks find this list of impacted and then severely impacted industries so that they can figure out if they are eligible, and if so, how much they're eligible for?
Correct. And I may not have realized, were we talking about a nonprofit or a for-profit with the
my example was a nonprofit, but it would apply to a for-profit as well.
Okay. So for the for-profits, you do apply with your NAICS code, but to find whether you're severely impacted or just the eligible level, on our Restore Rhode Island website, you see this who is eligible. Number 2 talks about industry. This red link will download a PDF document. This red call out box is who is severely impacted, and actually you'll see nonprofits are the top of that list.
So nonprofit, being a nonprofit would automatically make you eligible as a severely impacted.
Yes, that is correct. Yep.
Good catch, Meg. Thank you. All right, y'all. And I just dropped. Oh no, I put that in just a one-on-one. Hold on. I just dropped the link to that severely impacted list into the chat. We're about 8 minutes over time, so I'm going to wrap up. But again, this recording and any follow-up questions, as well as some additional information, and all of these links will be available sometime this afternoon on RISCA's website, and I'll post the actual specific address to that page where I put all of this information in on RISCA's Facebook page, but also in both the Arts Administrators and Artists and Creatives of Rhode Island group. And then you can all email Kara or info at Commerce for more information as well. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you so much, Kara, for this help.
Yes, I am so grateful for the opportunity. I know there's a couple follow-ups because as we do continue to evolve and refine, we get asked about expenses we're unfamiliar with. So again, we'll do follow-ups and we're around. Please don't hesitate to email us. We want to help and we really want to get the grant awards out to these entities and organizations. So thank you so much, Molly, and to everybody that joined us today.
So have a great day.
Thank you.